started with a quotation from Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And unlike Martin Niemöller, I'm both a socialist and, in some sense, a trade unionist. So I have less excuse than he did. I have two questions for councillors. Are the regulations and practices of a police state the appropriate way to regulate public protest? And is omnibus legislation the appropriate way to legislate suppression of human rights? The justifications for a bylaw on public nuisances are in the Municipal Act. I won't go on with those. There are lessons from Toronto in 2010. Andre Martin, the Ontario Ombudsman, had this to say about the regulations passed to enhance security during the G20 summit. It should never have been enacted, was likely unconstitutional, infringed on freedom of expression in ways that don't seem justified in a free and democratic society. Montreal passed Bylaw P6, which allows its executive committee to prohibit any peaceful assembly indefinitely at their discretion and without notice. And as a result of that, Sergeant Jean-Bruno Latour of the Montreal Police told La Presse, starting with the last three demonstrations, we've been intervening faster. The Charter protects the right to freedom of expression, but there is no right to protest. The lessons from Occupy Guelph that I take are that providing space for nonviolent protest and venues for continued dialogue is the way to get positive resolution of disputes. Regulation of protest as a precaution is provocative, counterproductive of dialogue and dispute resolution. The way forward, in my view, is to recognize there's public support for regulation of nuisance parties, but not for the suppression of right to protest. And so the omnibus bylaw, which was queried at committee as to why it wasn't split, should be split, and only the regulation of nuisance parties carried forward. And there are two aspects about nuisance parties that I think you should be aware of. The definition of nuisance party is a gathering on premises which results in disorderly conduct, public drunkenness, or public intoxication. But the definition of premises specifically excludes buildings and dwellings. And that's inconsistent with other parts of the bylaw in which every person not residing on the premises is referenced. If you put in buildings and dwellings, then you can apply the nuisance parties downtown, where it is that public safety is at risk. And I wonder how many people have to die or be very seriously and permanently injured before council takes some responsibility about action in that area. And since I have time, I can report to Councillor Findlay the specifics of the bylaw that I find so dangerous. First of all, Section 128 of the Municipal Act is a very dangerous section because it says the opinion of council in this section, if derived at in good faith, is not subject to review by any court. I'm sure that's unconstitutional, but it's in the Act as it's phrased. And the requirement in the bylaw is drafted that the executive director, in his or her sole discretion, considering the purposes of this bylaw and in the best interests of the city, is authorized to limit number of participants, types of activities, and revoke, void, or alter permits. And giving that kind of discretion in an area that's fundamental to the functioning of a democracy is, in my view, extraordinarily bad.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Whiteley. Any questions for Dr. Whiteley? Councillor Finlay?
It's the exemption piece. Were there other pieces of the draft nuisance bylaw that you had issue with?
The only parts of it that I accept as being valid in terms of there being a need for the city to act are nuisance parties where it is clear that public safety has been compromised numerous occasions in the past, and the city hasn't either had the power or exercised the power to do anything about it. So with regard to nuisance parties, there is a justification for action. For the rest of the bylaw, there is no justification, and indeed there is every reason to be apprehensive about the drafting of a bylaw that deals with public protest.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No more questions. Thank you.